Hi Year 12, I hope all of you are well. Today we will be starting a new topic and we are covering the topic of research methods. It is a huge one because it makes up about 10% of your entire psychology A level, and you'll find that research methods permeates its way through all the individual units that we've already covered in psychology. So we've come across research methods in social influence, we've looked at it in attachment, in memory, in psychopathology, and so on. For this part of the course, especially as we are engaging in remote learning, I have uploaded a handy research methods workbooklet, and it's about 68 pages long, and I'm going to quickly talk you through the contents of the booklet. And what you'll find is in the lessons to come, I will set you tasks based on this booklet, but also using the textbook, and I'll take pictures of the textbook and scan it through just in case anyone doesn't have the year 1 textbook. And we'll engage in tasks, like I said, using this workbooklet. And of course, I will have some PowerPoints for some of the topics within research methods that we can actually engage with virtually. So the first thing that I need you to do when you get the booklet, I'm going to upload a PDF version and also a Microsoft Word version. And you might find it easy, of course, to type in the Microsoft Word version. But the PDF is there just in case you want to print out the booklet. And normally I would have printed out these booklets for you guys to have to hand. So of course, the first thing that I would need you to do is to write your name on the booklet. And then I'm just going to zoom in and put Miss K. And if you go to the next page, you can have a look at the specification content. Now, this is directly from the AQA website, literally copied and pasted. And you can see the different areas in which AQA expects you to cover within research methods. On the following pages, I have a PLC-like document whereby you yourself can tick off when you've covered a topic and perhaps indicate whether you're confident in that topic. We've got the teacher section, but of course I can't fill this out due to our current situation. But what I will be asking you to do is to share your document, and I might ask you to share a page with me, and I will be able to check your work in that way. Now here I've got a list of the different exam command words, and this is just to help you understand what it is the examiner is asking of you whenever you come across an exam question, especially within research methods. And we will have practice completing some research methods questions to ensure that you are feeling confident in your approach. Now, this is one of my favourite parts of this workbooklet. This is where you have your glossary. And one thing that I learned when I was an A-level student like yourself is knowing key terms is so crucial. Knowing key terms is like adding seasoning to your chicken. I kid you not. Because if you're able to understand and define key terms, that in itself can provide an entire answer. So what I've done here is I've got a list of key terms all the way here, and it goes from A to Z. And as we go through research methods, I want you to fill out this glossary, and it might be that I ask you to read pages 178 to 179 and have a look at the key terms that are on that page and transfer the definitions into the relevant sections of your glossary on this document. And this is really helpful to do for revision. So that's a booklet in a nutshell. I just want to quickly take you through some of the basic activities that you might find on here. And with these activities, like I said, you can print it out and you can write an answer. Or you can put it on Microsoft Word and type your answer. Yeah. And that way, you're able to keep track of the sections that you've completed, and you're able to stay on top of your work. And And the last thing that I would like to show you is that, of course, you will find exam questions, and this is good for practice. But in addition to this booklet, I will be setting you some exam work to engage in. It is so important for you to stay on top of your work during this remote learning. The reason I say this is, of course, next year is your exam year, but we don't know what the situation is going to be like. We don't know whether teachers will again be put in the position where they have to provide a calculated grade, or whether indeed you're going to sit an exam, and whether the exam board will perhaps remove one of the areas of psychology so that you're assessed on less content. We don't know what the situation is, and that's why we have to prepare for an excellent result. And that means staying on top of your work so that at least you get a grade next year that you are proud of. So please do continue to work. Do ask me questions if you're stuck. And remember that I want you to do well. So give it your best, give it your greatest effort. And never forget that excellence is the norm, it's the standard. We do not do mediocre. Now that you are fully acquainted with the Research Methods booklet, let's get started on today's lesson. For today's lesson, we are going to be looking at the experimental method, and we'll focus primarily on slides 1 to 10 of this PowerPoint so that we can get our heads around independent variables and dependent variables within psychology. In research methods, there are non-experimental research methods, and these include surveys, naturalistic observations, and case studies. They're non-experimental because they don't require you to have a comparison of two groups or a comparison of two conditions. Neither do they require you to strictly have an independent variable and a dependent variable. On the other hand, experiments do require you to have controlled conditions, and by controlled we mean that you are able to establish cause and effect. They do require you to have an independent variable that the researcher is the one who manipulates. They do require you to have a dependent variable, which is what the researcher measures. And you are required to have at least two conditions for the independent variable, and we'll get into that later on. So independent variables. The independent variable is the variable that is manipulated to see what effect it has on the dependent variable. The researcher needs to manipulate the variable, otherwise it's not independent. And there are some independent variables where, of course, the researcher cannot tell you what gender you are. That's something that you come naturally with. And those experiments are known as quasi-experiments or quasi-experiments, depending on how you pronounce it. A study is only a proper experiment if the researcher manipulates the independent variable. Otherwise, the study is correlational, i.e. it's not establishing a definite cause and effect, it's just observing a correlation. And when we do focus on correlations later on in research methods, we'll understand that correlations simply look out for relationships between two coexisting variables. It's not looking for whether one causes the other, and this is why we always use that statement, correlation does not imply causation. So on the screen will come up a few examples of independent variables just so that you can fully familiarise yourself. And I know that you would have covered this in science, but I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So here are a range of independent variables. Gender can be an independent variable. Type of words participants are asked to recall can be an independent variable. So it might be that you have two groups. You give one group a list of psychological words, you give another group a list of what other subject, business studies words. Age of participants, so it could be that you're comparing young and old, so those are your two groups, that's your independent variable. It could be that you're comparing a subset of a group, so you might say I'm comparing the young adults with the mid adults, whatever mid adults are. Height of participants, so again you could go for, okay, I'm comparing people who are under 5'5" with people who are over 5'5". Those are your two groups. Types of pictures shown to the participants, so it might be that you're comparing the response to neutral faces versus angry faces. And lastly, number of languages spoken by the participants. So it might be that indeed you have two groups of participants. One group you've identified as being able to speak one language, another group you've identified as being able to speak maybe three languages, and maybe you're comparing their ability to read people's emotions. I'm making this up as we go along, but you get the idea. The independent variable is the one that you manipulate for the purposes of your research. Within your independent variable, you have to have at least two conditions. And I'm going to use an example to explain that. But the reason you need to have two conditions is in order to be able to measure its impact on the dependent variable, which is the thing that you are measuring. So for example, if you ask a question, if you have an aim for your study being, do colours impact memory? Your independent variable will likely be the colour of the paper on which the words are presented for recall. So it might be that you give one group a list of words on yellow paper, and you give another group a list of words on green paper. And in effect, your dependent variable, which is what you're going to measure, is their accurate recall. So if you're giving them 10 words, you're going to be measuring their accurate recall of 10 words. And it might be that one group, the mean average is 8 words on yellow paper and the mean average is 5 words on green paper. You can see that there are differences between the two groups. So our independent variable was the colour of the paper, yet our colour of the paper had two conditions, either yellow or green paper. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense to everybody. For your dependent variable, so like I said earlier, the dependent variable is a variable that is affected by the independent variable, and it must be measurable for an experiment to be valid. So if we go back to that last aim, that last experiment that we just had in terms of an example, this experiment would not be valid if we did not have a measurable dependent variable. So if we just left it at, I just want to see whether yellow paper versus green paper affects recall, that part affects recall. You haven't specified how you intend to measure affects recall. And it's where I gave the additional example of, okay, give them a list of 10 words to remember and they get a score out of 10. That is operationalizing the dependent variable. So operationalization, just to bring further understanding to this word, you should operationalize both your independent variable and your dependent variable. For the independent variable, it means that you should find a way to manipulate it. So that's literally giving it the breakdown of conditions. And then for the dependent variable, it means that you should find a way to make it measurable. And now we come on to the exercise that we're going to do together here, and we'll do a few on your workbook together as well. So we have the aim of the study. It says, does eating a substantial breakfast affect students' memory? Your independent variable, the conditions of the independent variable, dependent variable, and your measurement of the dependent variable. We need to come up with something. So we can see the aim of the study, does eating substantial breakfast affect students' memory? Students' memory is going to be our dependent variable. Because that is the thing that we are measuring. The independent variable is going to be eating a substantial breakfast. Yeah, so eating breakfast. But how can we break down this independent variable? How can we manipulate it so that indeed we are comparing the effects of perhaps two conditions? So we might say that one group are maybe given one cracker for breakfast. I don't know how ethical that will be. I'll put given a low calorie breakfast, and then the second group are given a high calorie breakfast. Yeah, so we've broken down our independent variable into two conditions. And then for our dependent variable, which is students' memory, so this right here, how do we intend to measure it? Well, we can stick with the example that I gave before, which is you give them a list of 10 words to recall. A list of 10 words. And you measure their recall accuracy out of 10. So they will receive a score out of 10. Yeah? So I hope that makes sense. Moving on to the next and final example on this PowerPoint before you go off into the workbook and complete some activities there. We've got here the aim of the study: do different types of music affect people's IQ? So similar to before, what I might do is I might make my pen different colour. Cool. So your independent variable, which one would it be? Certainly different types of music. And our dependent variable is certainly people's IQ. Yeah? And then here. Okay. And then if we had to break down our independent variable into specific conditions, you might say that one condition would have, let's put gospel music because I like gospel music. And condition 2, let's say country music. And then your measurement of the dependent variable, well, it's made quite easy here because it's a measurement of people's IQ. So you perhaps would literally give your participants an IQ test to complete, and they will be provided with an IQ score. And that in itself has operationalized IQ. So the score from the completed IQ test. There we go. Okay, so now what I want us to do is I want us to quickly move over to the workbook, and I'll get that on my screen now and be right back. Okay, so back to your research methods workbook. Like I said, we are going to be focusing on the tasks on page 12 to page 15, and I want you to work through them systematically, work through them in a way that works best for you. We're going to go through 2 examples from this task, and then I'll go on to the next task just to explain it for you all. So with this task, it says, generate a hypothesis for this study. Justify the direction of your hypothesis: directional, non-directional, one-tailed or two-tailed. Identify the independent variable and the dependent variable in this experiment. Fully operationalize your variables. And what I would like to do is I would like to quickly speak about what we mean by directional and what we mean by non-directional as well. And similarly, what do we mean by one-tailed and two-tailed? A directional hypothesis is a hypothesis that states the direction that you expect your results to go in. So, for example, in this particular study here, in this first example here, it says severe punishment causes anxiety. You can see that they fully outlined the direction that they expect their results to be. So they expect punishment to cause anxiety. A non-directional hypothesis states that there will be an effect, it states that there will be a change or there will be a difference, but it doesn't state the direction. So if we wanted to change this to a non-directional aim, a non-directional hypothesis, we would simply say severe punishment has an effect on anxiety. We're not saying what the direction it has, we're not saying that it causes, we're just saying that it has an effect. Yeah, so you can see the difference in language there. And I'm going to go through another example just to ensure that you understand the difference between directional and non-directional hypothesis. So for this one, severe punishment causes anxiety, we need to be able to identify our independent variable. Well, the independent variable in this case is going to be severe punishment. Let me reduce the size of that pen. And what I would like you to do, like before, I want you to identify at least 2 conditions for severe punishment. So it might be that you remove something nice from the person. So perhaps you take away their phone as one condition. And then the second condition is you put them in isolation. Sorry for these morbid examples, but these are the only 2 that I could think of. So we've specifically identified how we intend to put our independent variable into two conditions. Dependent variable is anxiety. So how are we going to measure anxiety? How do we make it operationalizable? How do we make it measurable? Well, you might say that you're going to give them an anxiety questionnaire that generates a score out of 20. The higher the score, the greater the anxiety. And that is a legitimate way to operationalize your variable. If you search on Google Scholar, there are a number of anxiety scales, we call them in psychology. But you don't need to go and do that. Simply say that you're going to measure anxiety via a 20-item questionnaire whereby the higher the score, the higher the anxiety. Full stop. The last part of this example and the last part of this particular question, and there's lots to come for you to complete and practice, is to generate a hypothesis for this study. And a hypothesis is a statement that predicts the outcome of the experiment. Like I said earlier, your hypothesis can be either directional or non-directional. Directional in that it states a direction that you expect your study to go in, your study's results to go in, versus non-directional being that it's a prediction, but it's not stating the exact direction that your results will go in. In this situation, your aim is geared more towards a directional hypothesis. Therefore, I would expect you to write a predictable statement that offers some sort of direction as to how your results are going to look like. So an example of a directional hypothesis, and I'm going to type this up because I want to make sure that you guys can read my handwriting, is, so we have our two conditions. Take their phone away, put them in isolation. So the anxiety score out of 10, no, actually it's 20, out of 20 for the group in the low punishment condition. And you can put in brackets, take their phone, will be lower than the anxiety score of the severe punishment condition. And in that condition, that was isolation. This is a directional hypothesis because what we have done, and it is a very good skill to do, is we've operationalized our dependent variable, which is the anxiety score out of 20. We've also made sure that we've mentioned both of our conditions of the independent variable, and we've stated the direction. So we're saying that the score is going to be lower than. Yeah, we haven't said there's going to be a difference in the scores. That will make it a non-directional hypothesis. We've said that it's going to be lower than. I hope this makes sense to all of you. Okay, so let's go through one more example. I'm going to do example 2, and then you're going to have a go at doing all the ones up until page 14, and then you can have a go at page 15. And I'll come to explain that task later on. Okay, so for number 2, it says there is a difference in the ability of grey and white rats in learning to run a maze. There is a difference. As soon as you see where they say there is a difference, you immediately know that this aim is a non-directional aim. And therefore, our hypothesis is going to be non-directional because they haven't stated whether grey rats, or white rats are going to do better. No, they've just said that there's going to be a difference between the two groups. So let's go step by step. Identifying our independent variable. Well, our independent variable is whether or not the rats are grey or white. So independent variable is the colour of the rats. And the conditions, grey or white. Your dependent variable in this case is the rat's ability in learning to run a maze. Ability learning to run a maze. So you have to decide, how am I going to make this measurable? And the way that comes to mind immediately for me is, what I might do is I might put the white rats in the maze, put the grey rats in a maze, and measure how long it takes for them to complete the maze. So how long does it take for them to get from point A to the end point, to the exit point of the maze? And that way you've got a real nice measurable way of identifying their ability. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. So our dependent variable will be time taken to complete the maze. Yeah, and time taken is going to be in seconds. We could get into the nitty-gritty and ensure that our study is standardized. So both the grey rats and the white rats must be put in the same exact maze. The maze should not be more difficult for one group than the other, because we're not testing the maze difficulty, we're testing their ability. And then for our hypothesis, our statement. So it says here, there is a difference in the ability of grey and white rats in learning to run a maze. We are simply going to adapt that and plug in the different conditions that we've made, plug in our operationalized dependent variable to ensure that our hypothesis is nice and clear and that our variables are nicely operationalized. So again, I'm going to use a text box function, and we will put here, there will be a difference. Make this smaller. In the time taken for grey rats and white rats to complete the maze. And what you might want to do is go back. So the time taken for grey rats and white rats to complete the maze, and you probably put a statement here, time taken equals their ability. So, just to summarize, in our non-directional hypothesis statement, we said there will be a difference. We're not stating whether grey rats or white rats are going to do better. We just know that there's going to be a difference. In the time taken, so this is our dependent variable. And then we've got our independent variable, whether they're grey or they are white. Yeah? So I hope this makes sense. Have a go at doing the rest of them. Take your time with them. Feel free to holler at your fellow psychological colleagues. Ask them how they're getting on. And then for this last task here, so if we go back to the first section, there's this task here which is going to follow on throughout all the pages, or the majority of the pages in this first section. Have a read of this task, and then this section will make sense, because for that particular scenario, you are going to have to identify the independent variables and operationalize the variables. You're also going to have to provide a hypothesis, state the direction of your hypothesis, operationalize your independent variable. So all that means is identifying the conditions, operationalize your dependent variable, so stating how you're going to measure it, and then provide a final hypothesis statement which has your operationalized independent variable and your operationalized dependent variable included within the statement. So all of this is for the example on page 12, which is here. Hope this makes sense. Enjoy this task.